Alright, everything's looking quite good now. I'm just going to apply another layer of adhesive to the bellows and then put the bellows into the body. That should do. Move that piece of paper out of the way. Just check the state of my bellows, see if there's one way up or the other I want to have them. That way, I think. Lower that into place. Check that they are square and that none of the pleats of the bellows are folded over the edge of the film gate aperture. That looks good. Right, well, I'll place a weight on those and leave those to harden up. That's all there is to it for the moment. Once that's done, I'll reassemble the struts mechanism in here and then start working on the film advance. I'm starting work on this shutter. I've taken the lenses off. They just unscrewed front and back. Just used my fingers, nothing exciting there. Looking at the diaphragm here, it's not unduly stiff, but it looks like there's oil on those blades, so that certainly can do with servicing. The shutter is one of the older Compurs, so it has 3 blades, not 5. The shutter release plunger is stuck. I've already been told that the shaft on that is bent. That would certainly seem to be the case. I'll have to see if I can straighten that. These things are rare as hen's teeth. I certainly don't want to scrap one. The shutter itself, let's try it. We'll try it on 1/2 of a second. We'll cock it. Well, it doesn't close. Let's try it on a faster speed. So it'll run at a 25th. Run at a 10th. Run at a 5th. Oh, it's running at a 1/2 now. Even run at 1. So basically it's a goer. That's a good thing. The shutter works fine on B, and we'll try it on the T setting. Now with these older Compurs, anything with a T setting generally, the B and the T setting are you don't cock the shutter first, you just press the release. That's working well. You can't cock the shutter when it's set to B or T, and if you do, you'll end up breaking something. Well, that shutter certainly needs servicing, but it's by no means a bad example. I would say it was a very good example. Let's pop this to one side. I need to look at this little plunger. I can see that it's bent. The question is whether I can straighten it or not. It's difficult to know how you'd go about bending something like that really. Oh, that's an improvement. There's one little tight patch there, but that's working quite well. I've got to find out where the tight patch is, and it'll be that there's a bend in here still, but I've got to pick where the bend is. It's tight there. I think it's going to be pretty subtle because I can't see it. Right, I may have to screw this into a cable release socket and then manipulate this rod about. There's a hint of a bend just at this point, but it's quite subtle. It doesn't exactly jam, it's like a point where there's some resistance. It has to run absolutely freely, otherwise it won't work on the camera. Right, I've got my work cut out for me. I'm going to run a little bit of marker pen on the shaft of this thing to act like engineering Prussian blue. I'll let that dry and then I'll move it in and out, and I want to see where it's rubbing off. Where it's rubbing off will be the high spot, and that'll tell me that's the outside of the area, the bend. That's the idea anyway. I don't know how well it'll work in practice. It's certainly rubbed off at this point here. There's no way to take this apart, it's all sort of crimped and riveted. If I was able to get the button off the top, I could probably do something with it. But that just revolves freely on the shaft, that button on the top. What I would probably do would be just to clear the hole in the body of this thing slightly to give it a bit more clearance. I can possibly work this with some brasso. Of course I'll lose the nickel plating on the shaft. I'd rather not do that. A tricky one. Well, I've got it straightened out, working correctly now. I've put a little bit of molybdenum paste on the shaft of the plunger and it's working fine. Now these things, the way they work is on the inside it presses against an arm. Now the geometry is not very good. They tend to stick. Well, as you can see, I have the struts back in the body, the new bellows. That's all looking good. I've cleaned the focus helical, made sure that the alignment marks that I made across here are in the correct position. I've got to lubricate this with a bit of helical grease and then drop this piece fits in behind the front standard. So I've got to drop the focus mount back from the front standard, put this in place and then screw the front standard back on. That's my next task. So I'll just remove those screws now. Just extend my struts. This goes up and behind here. Has to align, there's two slots in the back here. They align with pins back in the focus mount over here. You can see one of the pins in there. So I've got to get that all back in place. So first some lubrication on that helical mount. So I'll just roll that back. Typically I will put about 5 wipes of the helical grease across there. Just wipe off that excess rather. Just roll that in. Check that it's nice and smooth. That all feels good. I'll apply some into these surfaces where it's going to run in the focus mount. On the front surface there where it's going to be running against the back of the front standard. It doesn't need much, just a smear. And in the slots where it has to run on those pins. Then I need to make sure I've got it the right way up. And the right way up was there, I think, from memory. Yes, that looks right. I need to position that in the focus mount. That's good. I'll drop the front standard back over the top of it. 4 screws. I'm not doing these screws up tight at the moment, and I'll explain why in a second. That's good, I've got two of those screws in loosely. Now I'm going to move the focus scale, the outer helical here. I'm just shifting that slightly to bring the inner forward, so I know it's not binding against the frame. Tighten that screw up slightly, tighten that one up slightly. 2 more screws to go in there. That corner and that corner. Get them started. Check that the movement still works fine. It does. Tighten my 4 screws up. The 4 screws holding the front standard to the or the focus mount to the bellows are already in place, and I think they've all been tightened up already. I'll just check those 4. Yes, they have been. Okay, so that's our focus mount in place. And our focus scale ring can go back on there. So I'll pop that back down into the body. That adhesive I've used is probably still curing to some extent, so I don't want to have the bellows fully extended for any length of time just at the moment. I'm just cleaning this component, the focus scale ring. Most of the components on this camera are comparatively clean. I'm not sure of its exact history, but it's a reasonable assumption that it was broken some time ago and has been hiding away in someone's dresser drawer for the last any number of decades. I've got 4 screws here. Carefully aligning my focus scale ring with the marks that I had scribed across it. I'll get one of those screws in place. I'll back it up slightly, I don't want that tight. I want to be sure that I have my focus scale ring correctly aligned with my marks. And then I can nip those screws up. These are countersunk headed screws. Don't over tighten them. If you're doing this, don't over tighten them. What will happen, well, there's 2 things that can happen if you over tighten them in a situation like this. One is that the screw will pull back past the edge of the focus scale ring, and that alignment's good. And in that case, it won't be doing its job anymore, it'll be damaged. And the second is if you over tighten them, it will distort the outer helical. And if you distort the outer helical, the focus won't run smooth anymore, it'll stiffen up. So I'm just checking the action here. That's nice and smooth. That's good. I'm pretty much done on the inside of that body. I'm going to give it a wipe out and then I'm going to put the door on it, the front door. So I've just put a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud and I'm just wiping those inside surfaces. They're a bit dusty looking. Some of that is not going to come off, I can just tell. That's just where the paint has got chalky with age. It's never going to look 100%. Here I have the front door and I need to get this swung into place. So I'll pull my struts right out into position. Clip the door in place. I've got to get this spring, which is quite strong, tucked in under the body there without scratching the paintwork. So it's a bit of an act. I'm putting a steel rule down there to protect my paint while I bend that spring back out of the way. That spring is now in position and I can get my hinge pins screws in at the top here. If I can see where I've put them down on the tabletop. Yes, there's one. Here are 2 of these screws. One at the top, one at the bottom. One of them is a bit more mutilated looking than the other. We'll put that at the bottom. That'll be hidden by the leather. No one will ever see it. Not that anyone's probably going to see this one, because it's not easy to see at the top of the camera either. No, I can't pick up that hole. Let me get that screw out and start again. I'll just release that front struts, I think. Let them move back into the body slightly. That's better. And take that stress off that hinge. I get that screw in the place so I can see the hole it needs to go into. See if I can get that screw to start. No, it doesn't want to. The door must be sitting skewer. Let's try again. I've got the door almost closed. I can see the hole there okay. Let me try with that screw again. No, it won't start. Oh, it's moved. Very hard to get the alignment just right. That's in, that's done, that's the one at that end. Now at the bottom of the camera, well, with the top one in place, the bottom one lines up much easier. Yes, success. So our door is installed, and when it opens, the struts are firmly in place. That's good. The spring on that door is not meant to erect the struts entirely, it's meant to open the door so that you can pull it the rest of the way, in case you were thinking it should have been springing completely into place. There we have it. That's that part of the job done. Focus is nice and smooth. I need to turn my attention to the film advance mechanism next, and hopefully I'll be able to get that sorted out. The shutter I still have to service, but at least the release plunger works quite well. One of the things about these plungers is because of the way the mechanism's organised, it is inclined to stick in when you use it on the B or the T setting. That's working very well at the moment, but they are prone to sticking in, so be very careful, and it's because you press them in too far. If you press them in too far, they tend to stick. Of course, there's nothing to stop you pressing them in too far, so you need to press that release lightly, just enough to release the shutter. Not press it all the way in with some force. Back to the body anyway, because this was what I was planning to deal with. I'll need to clean the top of this body casting up here. Now I'm just removing old grease and any dust and dirt from here. It's quite clean really. Now the viewfinder, this plate's held on with 2 screws. I'm just checking that they are tight. They are, that feels good. And the first thing I want to do is to get my take-up spool back inside the camera body here. So I'm just cleaning around that spring inside the body and around that central boss. That central boss supports the take-up spool. The take-up spool, I'm wiping that over too, the inside particularly, just to make sure I've got rid of any old dried grease from in there. And I'll have a look at this take-up spool because I've just spotted something. Now in that groove there, in that slot, that's where you load the end of your film. And I can see there's a piece of film actually in there now, jammed in that slot. It's not uncommon for there to be multiple pieces jammed in there, and it makes it very, very difficult to get a new film loaded. So what I want to do is get that piece of film out. I think if I poke it from this side, I might be able to get it to come out the slot on the other side. It's starting to.